I'm going to speak about a building, a particular building, the history of a particular building as a paradigm for certain aspects of contemporaneity. I'm going to raise some issues that we've already talked about this morning, especially through talks, for example, Margaret Ann's talk this morning, and I've forgotten all the other names there. I don't have the programme. Where's the programme? Margaret Ann, Benoit, and Nicolas. I find that the sort of issues they raised, I'm going to talk about in terms of talking about. They talk a lot about construction. I'm going to talk about construction, its relationship to destruction. I'm going to talk about. They talk a lot about consecration, and I'm going to talk about desecration, consecration, and desecration. So, consécration, consacrer et désacraliser. Oui, c'est ça? Quelque chose comme ça. Okay, so I'm going to talk about these issues. For example, in the earlier talks this morning, I heard phrases like le rapport particulier à un espace. I'm going to talk about that. We heard from Margaret Ann later when she was answering a question, she said, tu fais partie de la bibliothèque et tu es la bibliothèque. I'm going to talk about these things as well, the relationship of the individual to the institution. I'm going to talk about it through one particular building. That building is, I'm going to show you a few slides of it. Here's a corner of it. That building is called St. Peter's Seminary. It's a seminary for training priests. It's about 40 kilometres from Glasgow. It's in the forest, so it's isolated. Okay. So here you see the chapel inside the seminary. It's a modernist building. It was said to be one of the foremost modernist buildings in Scotland when it was built. It's built along the model, very much derivative of Corbusier's work, especially some of you might know, some of you French people might know, Le Couvent de la Tourette. It's near Lyon. So it's very much not a copy of this building, but derivative of it, in as much as it takes the traditional model and it innovates the traditional model of the seminary or the couvent. So what I mean is, traditionally what you would find with the seminary would be, there would be a cloister round about a square. So here you have the educational building, for example. Here's that chapel you just saw. But unfortunately, and there's an older building around which it was built, a 19th century building. Unfortunately for this building, this side is a really steep incline. So they could not build the building here. So where you would normally have, like the church, the educational building, educational block, the dormitory, and the refectory, that was not possible to do. So it was very innovative in as much as what they did was, Gillespie, Kidd and Koya, about whom I wrote that book that you just mentioned, they built the seminary's bedrooms on top of the church. Now, for the church, that's not possible. You can't have something above the altar. You know, I don't know, something about the prayers going up to God. I don't know what, but it's not possible in church architecture. So how did they do that? You can see here. Here is the module of each individual bedroom marked out with a curve. That curve is the curve that it spans exactly one bedroom. So you see the relationship, the modular relationship between the individual and the institution. The institution consists of a series of individuals all joined together in one. Very modernist. It's, as I say, the foremost modernist building in Scotland. Here's the church. Here's how they did it. They built it like a ziggurat with the bedrooms out to the side, coming up like this, and then you have this free air going up to God, as you see, from the altar, from the church, from du nef. Ça c'est l'hôtel. L'hôtel, ça se dit? Ouais. L'hôtel, le nef ici. Okay. So it was very innovative, a very innovative modernist architecture for, of course, as we all know, the oldest institution in the west of Europe, the foremost institution in the west of Europe for 1,000 years. Anyway, I think we might say. Okay, so what was I going to say about this? So you can see the individual cells of the priests. They're not monks. They're priests, trainee priests. Seminaries are there. They're training. Isolated in the forest. Now, when was it built? It was built from 1960 to 1966. Okay, finished in 1966. Unfortunately for this church, something else was also happening around that period, 60 to 66. Those of you who know your ecclesiastical history will know what I'm talking about. We'll get to that in a second. So there you have St. Peter's Seminary, Cardross, 40 kilometres from central Glasgow, in the forest. First planned in the late 50s, built from 62 and completed Well, around a 19th century mansion in 1966. Something else was happening at the same time. Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council. Vatican II, ça se dit, no? Oui, okay, 62, 65. Almost contemporary with the building of the seminary for the training of priests for that institution. What is Vatican II? Why should that make any difference? Vatican II, we might say it is, or I'm going to say, it is the contemporization of the church. It is a movement to contemporize the church. Is that even a word in English? I don't even know. Again, I will turn to Professor Ruffel. Is that a word, contemporization? Is it?
No.
Okay, right. So the contemporization of the church. What do I mean? Well, you've got to think what it means. First of all, think about all the things, all the changes in rules and regulations of the liturgy and so forth that happened. First of all, you had the movement from the Latin Mass to the vernacular Mass, as we all know. Okay, so in general, it's about the bringing of the church, and the church says the church and the people of the church together, right? So no more isolation, no more we are up here and you're down there. So how do we do this? We start speaking the vernacular. Not only that, but we move the pulpit and the altar. Well, I'm going to end with the altar together in the design of the church. So the spatial design of the church has changed. The pulpit and the altar, c'est le chair et l'autel. Ça se dit? Le chair? Oui. Un rapprochement de chair et de l'autel. So in other words, of the Word of God and the body of God. The Word of God from the chair and the body of God at l'autel. We bring them together. Already we see different contemporalities of what is the Word of God, what is the body of God, what's the relationship. It brings them together. Not only that, before then, the baptistry is outside the church. So the children can't be a part of the church until they've been baptized. We bring the baptistry up to the altar, à l'autel, right? Okay, so we bring all these things together. We have the vernacular. Another thing that we do, interestingly enough, with the Vatican II is concelebration of the Mass. It is possible for more than one priest to say the Mass together. You think, so what? What does that have got to do? It's got something to do with space and with this building. Okay, I'll tell you why in a second. Okay, concelebration of the Mass. An interesting word when you think about contemporization. That's part of it in the church, the concelebration, celebrating together of the Mass. Okay, but most important for this building is that in the attempt to bring the people to the church, this doing away with the isolation, you know, the railing in front of the altar, that's done away with, so that people can approach the altar nearer. Okay. One thing that's really important is the church decides to stop training priests in isolation, but to train them in the community. This building has been built 40 kilometres away from Glasgow, in the forest, very difficult to get to, an isolated place. The church decides it's no longer going to do that. 62 to 65, the building is finished in 66. The building is obsolete before it is finished. For all these reasons, the movement of the different pieces of architecture in the church itself, the training of the priests, and so forth. Okay, if we look at the building, for example, you see these bits here? These are 5 little side chapels. There's 5 on the other side too, so that you can have 5 masses being said contemporaneously here and round the other side and one in. So 11 masses at the same time. So we have all these individuals in the building, 11 masses going on. It is a factory to produce priests in the middle of the forest. But it is obsolete. It is obsolete. It's almost as if Mrs. Thatcher was the head of the church. It is obsolete by 1966. Okay? Also because with concelebration, we don't need all these chapels anymore. All the masses can be said by the priests together on the one altar at the head of the church. So the very form, the very architectural form of this building is obsolete. It never performs to full capacity. There is never a full amount of priests in here. So they don't use the heating properly. It starts to leak and so forth. But this is the foremost, some people say, modernist building in Scotland. It's our Corbusier building. Okay. So what happens? There's institutional history. So is it the contemporization of the church? Okay. What happens? St. Peter's closes as a seminary in 1980. It becomes a drugs rehab centre, 83-87. In 1986, I think also Benoit, no, was it Benoit this morning spoke about abandoning buildings?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Okay? It's abandoned in 1987, completely. The church still own it. The church owned it until a year ago. Right? The church still own it, but they don't use it anymore. It's just left there. What is interesting is who then starts to use it. It starts to be occupied, colonized by a completely different sort of person. It's away in the forest. They put big fences round it so that no one can get to it. But people find their own way into it. They start to climb over the fences, dig tunnels, get round. Who are these people that go to it? Well, people go to it. That go to it it's adopted by artists, by filmmakers, by photographers, by kids smoking dope, by people drinking, by explorers, by picnickers, by architects, by dancers, by dramatists, by musicians. Films are made in it. There's paintings made of it. There's architectural photography done it. Here you see, here's what it's like now. A ruin, you see all the plaster falling off. There's no windows, there's no rooms now. Okay, it's all gone, it's a ruin since 1987. Okay, that's the inside now of the church, a complete ruin. There again, you see the module of one priest, right? One training priest. That's le nef vers l'autel, là. Oui. Bon, alors, so it is a complete ruin. These photographs, beautiful photographs, taken by quite a well-known architectural photographer in Scotland, Andrew Lee. C'est un peu comme, il y a en France Hélène Binet. Quelqu'un connaît Hélène Binet? She's a very famous photographer, architectural. Okay, so there's photographers making work of it. There's like people going out there and making lots of graffiti. There's dance goes on in the place. There's people making music in the place. But there's also picnickers and everything. It becomes a place to go. But to get there, you have to find your own way in. You have to climb over. You have to dig under. You have to get through a window. Okay, so it's the difference between outside and inside starts to change, starts to crumble. The whole building starts to crumble. Bits of wood fall off. It goes on fire. There's all sorts of art go on in there. What is interesting, amongst all this art that goes on in there, is that none of it is destructive. Although the building is falling apart, none of it is destructive of the building. It's all creative work. Okay? Only one set of people are destructive in this building. It is the church itself. In 1993, I think, when they decide to deconsecrate. So they still own it, but they decide to deconsecrate it, make it no longer a church. Do you know what they do? They send a man with a big hammer to smash the altar. Now the altar is made of solid granite. I'll show you. There, that's the altar there. They send a man to smash that. I have a piece of it. I was going to bring it, but unfortunately my partner said to me, "You won't be allowed on the plane with that, so I can't show you." Anyway, okay. So there's my next question. So is Vatican II the contemporization of the church? The second one is St. Peter's Seminary the feral bobo, le bobo sauvage, le bobo sauvage? Mais c'est pas un bobo violent quand même, con l'exception de l'Église. Ils vont là, they're the only ones who go to do any violence. They're the only hooligans who come and they smash it. Okay, but everyone else is being creative there. It's a wonderful experience, and it does this questioning of inside, outside, a building, a not a building, an institution, an individual, all the stuff that Boburn does, but it does it as a feral Boburn, a wild Boburn. There's no institutionalization. People just use it the way they want. Okay? So, for example, one filmmaker, and this is what I want to talk about, one filmmaker, a very important filmmaker, Murray Grigger, he made a film in 1972 when priests were in it, and to show how all the priests work in it. 37 years later, 2009, he came back and he made a different film. He filmed exactly the same shots as he filmed all around the building, and you can see the difference. Ça c'est l'hôtel en 2009, ça c'est l'hôtel en 2072. Okay, you see? So it's all changed. The roof has fallen off. Okay, and he made this film so that it's in a different ratio aspect, as you can see. This one, the first one was in colour, the second's in black and white. The first one was made in spring, summer. The second one was made in winter. But the second film is not that. The second film is showing both of them together. So you see the working as an institution with the people in it. You see it ruined with the artworks of people and the ruin of the thing going on. Okay. What is very interesting about this film? So here we see to do with my motto, the epigraph I put at the beginning, this idea of superposition. Rather than decide, oh, I've made a new film, here it is. He doesn't reject the old film, he shows it beside the new film. And it's very interesting how film can then be used to determine, to talk about, to examine this attitude to time that we call the contemporary. If you take this one shot, for example, this is a shot of the educational building. There's the same shot there, 37 years later. Okay, there's the old building there. The old building has fallen down, has completely disappeared. So what is quite interesting about the temporalities that you see in this one shot, you see, for example, you can see, for example, an existential temporality, the presence of the old building, the absence of the old building. You can see a kind of infinite, endless temporality of the evergreen tree, and a change, the temporality of the seasons, the trees with leaves on them, the trees without leaves on them. Okay, you can see a sort of moral temporality of the ruin of the building, there, and you can see the technological and if you like, the fashion temporality of technology and lifestyle change in the old building and the new building. So all this, these two shots together, you see these two things together. So that's why this is so interesting, this superposition of an image much later at the same time as an old image. Okay, so you see these cotemporalities of civil, technological, the infinitude, of the aging, of the decay, of the seasonal, of the existential, all together in one shot there. Okay, so I've got this film to show you, and you can see it later on if you want. You don't have to watch the whole thing, but it's very interesting seeing the priests moving around in this, and then the ruins in this at the same time. Okay, but finally I want to just close by asking, why is it in fact? So all these artists are going, photographers, painters, dramatists, musicians, and are making works in this place. It's been happening for 20, 30 years. Right? Why is there this contemporary obsession with ruins? And why are contemporary artists so engaged with ruins rather than with museums, galleries, and so forth, as we see in this picture here? Well, of course, one point is, as Lionel so rightly points out, is the archaeological aspect of the contemporary. But the ruin is a particular kind, this ruin as well is a particular kind of archaeology here that's important. Why is it? Why is there this current day obsession? You know, the Germans, ruinenlust, they call it. There's this obsession with ruin just now. What is it about the ruin that says something to us in our contemporary age? Well, this ruin clearly is not the classic, Winkelmann ruin of the 18th century. It's not something from an ancient civilization. It's not some old antique building. No, it's a modernist building. It's a modernist building from the 1960s. It was already a ruin in the 1980s. So it's not the Winkelmann type of ruin. It's not the Burkean type of the sublime that we would normally imagine. It's not the Gilpin type of the picturesque that we would imagine either. In fact, it's something more like, say, Piranesi would show us, that the idea of some sort of exuberation of insides and outsides and lightness and darkness and different sorts of activities going on everywhere in this building. This is it. So it's something more like this compromised, problematicized breakdown of the inside and outside that invites different sorts of engagements by different artists. Okay? And in fact, I think that if we look at Georges Simmel, George Simmel's essay, The Ruin, of 1911, and his definition, we can find something very interesting. George Simmel talks about the ruin, and he says that basically when you have a perfect new building, built and constructed and complete, at the other end of the time scale, you have just a heap of stones with no structure in them whatsoever. And the ruin is everything that exists between those two. Okay? So, in other words, he says that there is an interminability of the moral process. There is never a definitive state of the ruin. It is always in change. Okay? He says, in fact, there is and I quote, he says, in fact, there is a dialectic between the upward striving spirit and the downward sinking nature. And he says, and I quote again, there is never a definite state of the ruin. This is This reminds me very much of the way Agamben speaks about the contemporary in that famous essay of his, when he speaks about, which he steals actually from Benjamin, the notion of fashion. When are we actually in fashion? Is it when, you know, the designer thinks it up? Is it when the designer actually cuts the material? Is it when you put it on, it's already out of fashion, the designer's moved on to something else? Is it, you know, last year? No. So when is that moment of now? It's always moving. When is that moment of in fashion? When is that moment of the ruin? It's always changing. The past and the future are in a permanent tussle. So that, if you like, with the ruin, we have a sort of Zeno's paradox. You know, that idea where you're going somewhere, at each moment you're halfway between there and where you went, so you never arrive. You never arrive at the ruin, at the final ruin. Okay? As long as there is structure, some sort of structure, even one stone on top of another, okay, you have an inside and an outside. Something with light gets in and light comes out. So what you have with the ruin is that the inside-outside debate is always in question. Not just as physical space, but as disciplinary space as well. Because here we have a film, right? A film made about this ruin. A film made about this archaeology. The idea that film, the two-dimensional art par excellence, should be useful for archaeological work, for raising evidence and finding evidence in archaeological work seems so paradoxical. But yet, this is what happens with this film, and we're going to put it on during the break and you can see it, okay? So, I think we can find some reason for that in Benjamin's analysis. Benjamin's analysis that he puts to us in the work of art in the age of reproduction. It's called something different in French. Famous essay, everyone knows it, okay? But nonetheless, he says some very interesting things about film in it, about film and space, and how film changes our conception of space. It's changed by the jump cuts, the slow motion, the close-ups and so forth, change space for us, and we can manipulate space with film. He says, and I quote, "The camera introduces us to unconscious optics." You know, he very specifically compares it to the work of psychoanalysis. The way psychoanalysis gives us new insight into our own personality, this gives us insight into our relationship with space and film. The camera introduces us to unconscious optics. An unconsciously penetrated space, I quote, is substituted for a space consciously explored by man. So with slow motion, we change it. With close-up, we expand space. With slow motion, we slow it down, our relationship to it, and make it larger. Okay. So what do we have with this film? I'm just going to finish now. What do we have with this film? Which you will see. Okay. Gregor's film, by staging the ruin with these two different shots of the same thing, 37 years apart, shown together. It's a prize-winning film, by the way. Okay. Gregor's film, by staging the ruin, elevates this Benjaminian complexity of ways of apprehending space to another level. As the spectator, I should show you this, still oh, there it is. As the spectator in this film, as the spectator in this film is guided through the structure and forced to shift their gaze repeatedly back and forth, navigating across time, 37 years, and into different views of contrasting scales and representation of space and what has happened in space and the events that fill up that space. Okay? So the relationship of time and space in different views is seen in different views and contrasting scales of space, and we navigate across time. The relationship between time and space is made multiple and complex. It is layered here, such that the contemporary is displayed as an existential category, an attitude itself to time and space. As I say, we can see the film during the break. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you.